This is episode 437 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, this week, Mark Ronchetti, challenging for governor of New Mexico, came out with his plan for education and what he would like to do and see happen in the state of New Mexico when it comes to educating our children. And I bear warning, this is going to be another education heavy episode. There's been a lot going on in this area, and I would encourage folks to do one of two things. If you have not read or seen this plan, go to markronchetti.com and look at his education plan. 6 pages of a lot of detail there. Policy wonk heaven, if you will. And then, we're going to be talking as well in a few minutes about the governor, New Mexicans for Michelle.com/priorities. Her tab is investing in education. She has 6 boxes up there on her website. And you can find what information there is about her plans moving forward for education. But Ronchetti has a lot more meat on the bones, and that's why we're going to spend the first part of this show really talking about it. Like I said, 6 pages, very in-depth, talks very extensively at the outset of the importance of education and how it can affect people's lives, children's lives, affect our economy, the American dream. I think it's a really good, if you're talking about a preamble, if you will, to a document, and the U.S. Constitution was nothing if not a policy document. This, in its own way, the preamble itself is very strong and very convincing of the importance of education. And you don't have to tell us at the Rio Grande Foundation this. We've been working at the education issue, working on it since the very foundation of the organization. And anybody who knows anything about New Mexico knows that education is a critical issue where we come in oftentimes 50th, sometimes 51st, and generally speaking, very, very much towards the bottom when it comes to education performance. So I want to start out with that and get your thoughts, Wally.
Yes, we have a difference of visions in terms of what the issue is. I believe in New Mexico, we have focused a lot on the inputs, how much money we're putting into the system, and we've done. 1, a good job of focusing on that, and 2, a good job of raising the amount of inputs, how much money we're spending. The outputs is where we're really falling short, and our what we're getting for our money, what our children are receiving from an education for the money and time and effort that's spent in the state. That's where the issue is, and it's to the point now where, I remember years ago people would do hand wringing about the level of DWI in New Mexico, and they did that really for a couple of decades. And then finally, some policies changed, and people started to do things that actually impacted that. I get a sense that maybe even in education, we're now to the point where it's not just the inputs we talk about. We have to talk about the quality of the education that's actually being received.
Yeah, definitely important point. Now, we move into specifics. First, make up for lost time. Ronchetti recognizes the impact of lost time during COVID-19 and the pandemic, and specifically a year plus not in the classroom for New Mexico kids. So he provides or would provide every low-income child's family with $1,500 of an education stipend. That's first through third graders to help them with tutoring and other other services that can help get them maybe back up to speed. require school districts to spend their COVID relief funds on classroom learning interventions, school-based summer academies, more towards getting kids back up to speed as well. Then we get to more dollars in the classroom, cutting back on bureaucracy. And this is actually a plan put forth by, and he acknowledges, Think New Mexico. We've had Fred Nathan on the show before. Certainly we concur, where possible, getting the bureaucracy cut down to size. It's easier said than done, but it is a worthwhile goal. Increasing parental involvement in what children are learning, giving them transparency, that is parents, vocational schooling. This is, I think, arguably the most stark difference between Ronchetti and the governor's. Her plan doesn't really exist. We'll talk about that in a second. But where she has gone, of course, free college, whereas Ronchetti talks at some length about vocational and career learning and really emphasizing that particular aspect of education. Talking about principals and school leadership, I think that's an important thing. If you have well-trained, competent, confident school leadership, that makes all the difference. And then early intervention. This is a little bit of the Susana Martinez playbook, where focusing on early child reading, which Susana's playbook was out of the Florida playbook, and Florida does very well on education with a lot less spending than we have. Truancy, that's been discussed in the Journal, Albuquerque Journal, at some length. It's a real problem. We need to get kids into school, and mental and emotional health. So this is a doozy of a detailed policy discussion. And part of me in the back of my head says, this is Mark Ronchetti kind of overachieving to try to push back against that whole just a weatherman argument. But anyway, before I turn it over to you, Wally, it's certainly not the just come in with school choice, guns a-blazing, so to speak, just have an education savings account. Of course, the legislature's not in the position right now to pass an ESA like Arizona did. It's a much more kind of nuts and bolts reforming the existing system. And whether you think that Ronchetti is serious about going with ESAs at some future date or not, I think that would be an interesting thing to see, but we're a ways off from that. It's definitely a detailed and very policy-driven set of proposals.
Yes, and one of the things I really like about it is the acknowledgement is that here in New Mexico, we are in a position of needing to play catch up. We are really struggling. And then the fact that there's an early childhood reading along with the $1,500 of tutoring and other things. Here is my vision for New Mexico, and I think it's not inconsistent with what Mark Ronchetti's are. But for first, second, and third graders, if you've got kids that are in soccer, Little League, Yaffle, whatever, some activities, I guarantee you that the parents know. They know the record of the Yaffle team, of the soccer team, how many matches have been won, how many have been lost. On this early childhood reading with tutoring and other things, picture a world where every family knew the level of reading attainment of their first, second, and third grader, and we're in a position to help them improve on that if it needs improving on that. I think that's the sort of thing that's going to be necessary here in New Mexico to get us back online. Now, the one problem with that I can see from a political point of view, not a practical point of view, is that tutoring doesn't necessarily go through the coffers of the teachers union.
Right.
That could be anything, but we need something like this. I'm going to compare two things that probably don't need comparing. But, if you remember back in COVID, we used to have all kinds of updates on the status of COVID. Man, would I love to see here's the status of education every month, I would tune into that weekly, but quarterly, monthly, talking about what's going on from an attainment point of view, getting our kids back in shape here in New Mexico, because if you get some too far behind, and there's that whole thing about why that early intervention is so important. If they can't read by a certain level, the correlation between that and basically academic failure later in their academic career by the time they hit middle school and high school is extremely high. So yeah, we have a problem. Are all of these ideas going to be implemented? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but I do think it addresses the issue and takes a realistic look about where we're starting from and what some good ideas might be to get us back in the game, educational achievement wise.
Yeah. Now, by comparison, we go to newmexicansformichelle.com/priorities. Go to investing in education. That's her main, at least on the website that she has set up for her campaign, her main education-oriented statement. And she talks about a lot of things that she's done. Spending money is primarily what she has done. Investments, of course, is the way they frame things. Bilingual and multicultural education. Salary increases for teachers. Universal pre-K, childcare. You've got free college. Those are the kinds of things that she discusses. Now, astute observers will note that New Mexico remains at the very bottom in terms of educational outcomes. Now, even if a governor had done everything that the Rio Grande Foundation wanted in 4 years, would that necessarily move the needle in a noticeable way? Maybe, maybe not. But I think you would have a widespread acknowledgement that things are happening, that accountability is there. You'd get the first people making noise and saying, yeah, this is improving things would be the parents, because they would see what their kids are learning and how better they are doing. I think it is very hard to make the case that anything the governor has done so far has really resulted in any significant positive changes. And the Albuquerque Journal recognizes this point in the Sunday paper. They have their moonshot countdown cartoon, where the cartoon is basically the idea of proficiency, and it keeps on going further and further out into the future rather than counting down to. It's kind of like the spaceport, actually.
There's a little double entendre in the Trevor cartoon. So
yeah, and editorial is waiting for liftoff. Governor's promised education moonshot has yet to show academic results, and we see that from the state's own test. We are likely going to see that from the National Assessment of Education Progress results that come out in October. The governor can talk all she wants about these past quote-unquote successes, but there's literally nothing. And I would encourage you, those of you listening, watching, wherever you are, if you have friends or family, if you are on the fence about this election, look at these detailed education plans and decide for yourself. It is a clear contrast. Michelle Lujan Grisham does not have a single tangible education proposal for her next 4 years in office. We are still dead last in education. The Journal recognizes that the moonshot has certainly not happened. We're just waiting for some kind of positive change to happen in our education system, but it really hasn't come about yet. And she's not putting forth specific plans. It's surprising, not just from a policy wonk perspective. It is surprising from a political perspective, because I think this would be something that they would want to think through in a very careful way.
Yeah, and I was thinking, Paul, about when Susana Martinez was governor. Believe me, her education agenda was not acted upon almost at all. Having said that, she would at least go to the schools that were doing well and anecdotally celebrate their successes. And there's nothing even a parallel with that currently coming out of the Lujan Grisham administration, talking about where achievement is happening. So I don't know, if the politics are such that they feel like doing something like that would take away votes from their core constituency of the teachers and the teachers union relative to the awareness level from parents and the general population. But you're right. There's no celebration of anything in terms of what's going on, pointing to a success out there that I've seen, and maybe I've missed something.
A success in terms of student outcomes.
Yeah,
or,
somewhere, one group of students that, here's a group of students that was struggling and now they're doing much better. What school is that? What program? What is that? And we're not seeing that.
Yeah, and you mentioned the unions, and it does kind of strike me that she may not want to focus on what she's doing in the future because it might look altogether like what she's already done in the past. Because, once you get the pre-K done, it's widely expected that'll pass this session. Once you get the raises done and spend more money, you're really kind of, well, we're going to spend more money again. And I think that seems to be their honest to goodness plan is spend more money over the next 4 years. I don't really see a lot of wiggle room for innovations because she is tied into, we've talked about it, and this is my talking point on the unions. The unions talk about change, but what they talk about change, they talk about hiring more of the union members and hiring more in the profession and spending more money, which is kind of redundant, but it is what it is. They don't actually seem to want a lot of change to the system itself. And, Ronchetti, while not going full bore on choice, is at least talking about changing the system and restoring some accountability and moving the needle that way. So it's, I guess their entire ideology keeps them in that box.
Yeah, and they talk about investing in education. Well, investing in education is only an investment if it's producing returns and in the quality of education. Otherwise, it's just spending for education. And so, not to be so jaded that I can see this on either side, but let's. Is the governor doesn't ever want to talk about anything other than the inputs, as I talked about a little earlier in the podcast, or, let me just say, flash, highly unlikely. Does she have, if she is reelected, does she have a plan to try to move the educational bureaucracy in a direction to get better performance? I don't know. I would say that's highly unlikely, but the bottom line is we talk about the amount of money going in and, have a good day. And so we'll get back to you in 4 years and let you know how that went.
Yeah. Now, notably, and I think this is very, very interesting, and another topic that in a world with better media, we would have more attention.
In a world with better media.
Yeah. She writes right there on her website, Investing in Education, that Michelle Lujan Grisham is a product of New Mexico's public school system. Now, I would put that in the category of bald-faced lie. She may have gone to elementary school at a school. She's born in Los Alamos. She went to high school in Santa Fe, and wait for just a second on that. But when you discuss you being a product, certainly high school is kind of the formative time frame. I think most people, you say, I'm a product.
I'm a product of, does that mean elementary? Is it more likely to mean elementary school or high school?
and I go with high school all the
Oh,
way.
she went with elementary school.
Well, that's being generous. We don't know. It's tougher to find biographical information on people because nobody says I'm a product of my fifth grade class that I had in whatever school that you may have been in. So the point
And Paul,
is,
and I don't know if this is the thing about the 60s, but when I was in elementary school, they would always say, well, you better watch out because this is going on your permanent record. Okay, let me just say that elementary school permanent record, it's nowhere. And so to the point where we can't even tell where a sitting governor went to elementary school.
look, and I get why she's saying this politically, but Michelle Lujan Grisham is a graduate, according to her own governor website, not her campaign website, of St. Michael's Catholic School in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That is not a quote unquote public school, certainly not part of the public school system. I am proudly the product, if you will, of Catholic schools. Now, I could say, well, my kindergarten was public, and then my college education was all public.
Right.
But I would never, if I'm running for office, you can book it. I will never try to pass myself off as a product of the public school system of whatever, you can name whatever state or any place. I went to college in 2 different states, Ohio and Maryland. The point being that it is at best, highly selective, politically oriented use of her biographical record in order to attempt to make her look like something she's not. And by the way, even if you went to elementary school, 1st through 8th grade, or kindergarten through 8th grade in Los Alamos, for educational purposes, might as well not be a part of New Mexico. Los Alamos is one of the highest performing districts in the entire country. And
we should do what Los Alamos is doing. We should have a national lab in every small town in New Mexico, Paul. We would have good education. So
I think that is a true statement. However, it is also an impossible statement.
But not the way the feds are spending money, but yeah.
That's true. But, with all due respect to my friends and folks up in Los Alamos, it would be, could you imagine how bad New Mexico's educational outcomes would be if we didn't have Los Alamos to add into that entire, framework? But very, very, disappointing, even for somebody like myself who, with the governor 4 years, it's hard to disappoint me given her track record. I would hope that she might have something for us and not try to lie about her past.
Yeah, this is an odd one. This is an unforced error. It's kind of silly. It reminds me a little bit of the New Mexico parlor game of, I can trace my ancestry in New Mexico back 23 generations or 13 or 14. This is one of those, it's like I'm a product of public schools. Hey, and Paul, I just want to say, in terms of full disclosure, I went from 1st to 12th grade, public schools in New Mexico, got my college degree, a public college in New Mexico State. So I am a product of public schools. It would be like me having taken a Harvard summer seminar, you know what I mean, where I get a certificate and say, Wally Drangmeister, a product of the Ivy League. So, it's like, yeah, maybe, but come on, just take that out of there. Go in and change the website. It's okay.
Well, I've often heard New Mexico State referred to as the Harvard of the Southwest.
Well, Harvard of the Yuccas, Yale on the Rio Grande. It's called a lot of things. Shout out to former President Gary Carruthers, who was fond of saying that. But yeah, it was a good school, but certainly it's a lot of things, but it maybe isn't the Ivy League. So,
but that's okay.
And that's okay.
All right. Well, guess what? We have more on education. The Heritage Foundation has released a brand spanking new report, the Education Freedom Report Card. And by brand new, I don't mean this is just an updated new data that they are working with. They are completely creating a new report with the attempt in mind to highlight states that are working towards empowering parents and families and, naming and shaming, if you will, states that don't do that much to improve parental choice and educational outcomes. And it never ceases to amaze me, even on things like educational outcomes, where there is a notable red-blue differential on education freedom, but it's not as simple as you think. For example, California comes in 29th in education freedom, obviously. The bluest of the blue there, a state that really has been dominated by the unions for a very long time. So this report is available at heritage.org. Again, I put details and links at Heirs of Enchantment. It is a very well done report, and we're working on lining up one of the authors for a conversation podcast. The long and short of it is that you have an overall rank on school choice. New Mexico comes in 26th on that. Overall, we're 38th, so not so hot from the overall rank perspective. Transparency, we're 43rd, which happens to be our worst score. 30th on regulatory freedom, 28th on spending. And spending, that involves what kind of results do you get for that spending, not just how much are you spending. So, definitely not great outcomes. We're not 51st, so that's good. But
when we play the game, number 1 or number 51, we're neither, but we're a little closer to 51 than we are to number 1.
Yeah, and I'll go through some of the top performers. Florida, number 1, which, if Susana Martinez had made the case for choice, she would have been well served, and I'm sure Florida would have been close to the very top of the list, even when Susana Martinez was governor, anywhere from 4 to 12 years ago. So, Florida does a lot of good things on education, but they come in number 1 on the overall report. Arizona, number 2. Look no further, my friends, than the neighbor to the west in terms of their educational outcomes, performing top of the charts. You have Indiana, number 4. Mississippi, number 6. So that shows that we were ahead of the curve, if you will, in praising Mississippi,
right,
and their outcomes. Idaho, number 3. So those are some of the top performing states. Again, look for yourself for details. Utah, neighboring state, 11. Colorado at 33rd, which 5 slots higher than New Mexico. Texas, 12. Oklahoma, 18. So again, we trail all of our neighbors, which is par for the course. We also trail California, which is not always par for the course. So states that round out the very bottom, not entirely surprising that New York would be 50th as a whole, New Jersey 49th, Massachusetts, which is a high-performing state to be sure, 47th, and Maryland 48th. So you've got some of those East Coast states that spend a lot on their education systems and actually tend to achieve fairly high results, but don't have much in the way of the things that the Heritage Foundation is looking for in that report. So this is much more of a policy-oriented report, with the assumption that if you do these policies well over time, you achieve greater results over time. You may not be able to spend what a Massachusetts, a New York, or a New Jersey spend, but Arizona outpaces New Mexico with a similar population, demographic, less spending. They spend less money in Arizona, but they have a much more choice-driven environment down there. Texas surprised me because Corey DeAngelis, who's been a podcast guest, has criticized Texas for their lack of school choice, their lack of robust choice-like education savings accounts, and yet they rank 12th overall. So we haven't dug into every single aspect of this report, but it is a worthwhile report, and we'll definitely dig into it at a future podcast where we interview one of the authors.
Yeah, very interesting, and maybe there's something here. And then, like you said, Paul, in terms of the Mississippi
Yeah.
Mississippi was a follower of the Florida approach early
Yep.
on. At the same time, New Mexico was trying to do that under Susana Martinez. They were able to do it, and they were able to get a lot of benefit. Now, having said that, that was a long time ago. That's 10, 11 years ago, and we're 10, 11 years behind here in New Mexico. But I guess the point is it may not be too late to start along that path. And, it's as you said earlier, none of these things are going to have huge impacts overnight, but continuing to go in the wrong direction, that doesn't seem like the way to go either.
Yeah, and Louisiana is another state that ranks in the top 10. And again, you're right. This does not change. The lag time is tremendous when it comes to education policy. That's why I'm even giving Lujan Grisham a bit of slack for 4 years of really non-existent results or negative results. Pandemic, of course, being part of that time frame. But we definitely need to create these programs, put more school choice, put an emphasis on that, because it'll benefit the next generation of kids and the next class of kids, and so on and so forth. And the more we continue to let those children fall through the cracks, the worse it is for the future of those children specifically, but also the future of New Mexico from both an economic and a demographic perspective. We know we're losing our families, we're losing our kids. A lot of people moved out of state due to the governor's lockdowns of COVID, and there's really no time like the present to get moving in a more favorable direction. And I can say that not only will the governor not move us in that direction, she has no plan whatsoever in her education policy. So what was that, Wally, about a 32-minute conversation about education?
Yeah, there we go.
All right.
Well, and where we are in New Mexico reminds me of the quaint yet probably applicable Chinese proverb about planting a tree. The best time to plant a tree or to reform your education system where it gets better results is 10, 20, 30 years ago. The next best time to do it is today. And today's all we have to deal with here in New Mexico because we didn't do it 10, 20, or 30 years ago.
Yes, as somebody who values, especially out on the golf course or outdoors in general, values the shade of a tree in that intense New Mexico sun. The tree ideal is to have something in place that's been there for a while, but you might as well get started if you are serious about that tree. And same applies to our children. Now, in a related but distinctly non-education specific talking points and item for us here, ran across a new report from a website called World Population Review. They looked at welfare recipients by state, adjusted for population. So, of course, we're going to be talking about data out of 100,000 folks. So for every blank, we are talking about 100,000 people. So this is not a percentage formally, but it is.
You can convert it to percentage.
Yes,
pretty darn easy.
It is.
So,
this is a.
Even with my New Mexico education, Paul, I can do that easily.
Well, I am pretty jaded, as I admit, to the policies of New Mexico being worst of the worst in a lot of contexts. But this stuff is just mind-blowing, to say the least. So they looked at, World Population Review did, 6 major federal welfare programs. TANF, that's Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. SNAP, the nutrition program. Supplemental Security Income, Earned Income Tax Credit, Housing Assistance, and Medicaid. And looked at how many people in each state received those programs as compared to 100,000 people. New Mexico, we're number one. We're not just number one. We blew every other state out of the water, like we're lapping them. And that's not a good thing. 21,300 of every 100,000 New Mexicos, about 21.3%. I know, the higher math.
For doing math in your head, good job.
That's a high number, especially when you compare to the next highest state, Louisiana, 17,320 per 100,000. So I did the math, both, obviously that's close to 4 percentage points. But if you look at a percent differential, 23% higher than number 2, Louisiana. That is mind-blowing. New Mexico has a welfare program. It is a very tough issue, and it is one that is tough for democracies to deal with because when you wind up with so many people on the welfare rolls, do they have an incentive to vote to potentially impact their welfare payments or change the system in any way, shape, or form? They want to keep that money flowing. And I think it really sets up a conundrum for democracy, broadly speaking. I know Democratic Republic, whatever you want to call it, but when the people can vote themselves largesse, are they going to stop doing that and get back to work? Other states, West Virginia, Mississippi, but Mississippi's at 14,872. We're talking a third, broadly speaking, less people on welfare in the state of Mississippi per population than New Mexico. And it's so that it's just crazy. It's mind-blowing that New Mexico has such a bloated amount of people on welfare. But I see the previous conversation about education. I see, the welfare payments and structures that have been put in place, the disincentives to work, and cultural issues that we have and other states have, like Mississippi, West Virginia. Don't get me wrong, but boy, this is the one kind of data point that just reaches out and says, is it possible to turn New Mexico around if we have this kind of welfare population? I know it's got to be a priority for any serious person elected who wants to change New Mexico for the better, to incentivize more work, more workforce participation. Ronchetti has it in his plans, but boy, this is a challenging statistic.
Yeah, and you said the magic words in my mind. This is highly related to that workforce participation rate. If you're on these assistance programs as your primary or sole source of support, you are not out there in the workforce. And interestingly, because so much of the spending flows through the federal government, it doesn't collapse the economy of a state like New Mexico directly. And at some point, we didn't think it was likely to collapse the overall economy of the United States because of federal spending. Although in the last couple of years, we've been pushing the envelope in terms of our deficit and our debt as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product. But yeah, these are not good numbers coming from another way, and you could argue too that today's poorly educated children that are in elementary, mid school, and on into high school are tomorrow's government program assistance recipients here in New Mexico. I mean, but the goal is to break that cycle and break that association. And yeah, this is a pretty disturbing one.
Yeah, and this is one of the fundamental problems that we've talked a lot, both in our interview today, but also about the problem over the time of the incentives of the federal government coming in with these welfare programs and then printing money to finance them. One is it incentivizes states to enact bad policies because there is a serious contingent, mostly among the hard left progressives, that believes that expanding these federal programs is a form of economic development. This was huge when Susana Martinez was discussing Medicaid expansion under Obamacare. But the fact is that this is not economic development. It is a dagger at the heart, not just of New Mexico and its economy, but at the heart of our civilization. If we continue down the path of incentivizing more and more people in our population to remain on government assistance, that cannot be good, and it really it leads to some very dark places. So I would, I don't want to overdo it, but that is that report makes for very scary reading.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That is not one that you do not want to be the bottom of that list for very long. That's for sure.
All right, and we'll briefly discuss this last item. It's almost as if government is ineffective or something. And I already talked about one of these things on the Sunday paper. This is both Albuquerque Journal stories. All the money that we've spent on education, and the Journal says they're waiting for liftoff. This is an editorial. Governor's proposed moonshot has not shown academic results in education. That's from Sunday's paper. Then on Monday, 2015 behavioral health tax, Bernalillo County specifically, benefits so far unrealized. People who live in Bernalillo County may know that the county adopted a gross receipts tax increase in order to enhance its behavioral health services. And the Journal is saying that at 2015, so we're talking 7 solid years ago, that those benefits have not been realized. And, seeing these kinds of headlines and stories just makes me wonder, is government a poor steward of our tax dollars? It couldn't be that, could it be? Could we be better off by keeping the money ourselves or returning it to the taxpayers? And by the way, before I hand it to you, Wally, Wallet Hub ranked New Mexico 49th on return on investment per taxpayer dollar invested. I believe Hawaii was the only worst one. So I believe Wallet Hub agrees.
Yeah, Paul, normally I can remain upbeat for the full 40 or 45 minutes. Man, you are wearing me down today. Yeah, this is another one that is not good news, but as we've talked, we have a lot of this is back to that core concept. We're not too bad at the inputs of spending government money on problems, whether it be education, homelessness, taking care of crime, but it's the getting results that is seemingly the problem. And again, not a good report. And then the answer is, is government the answer? Government can do some things some of the time. When you're over reliant on an inefficient government, good things tend to not happen. I think that's what we have here.
For the record, we were not dead last in school, in education, freedom, and heritage's index. Ronchetti's plan, while not where I want it to be, is a very good, very forward-looking plan, and the governor just doesn't have a plan. So it's not all bad news out there. Certainly, that welfare number,
that welfare one,
is
that
rough.
That one hurts. So.
That's rough. So, all right. Well, hopefully, folks, you are more upbeat than Wally here. But thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.